Hey there, Internet. Welcome to the Hard On Gear channel, where I discuss and review my used and abused knives and gear so that you know what is or isn't worth spending your hard-earned money on. This conversation may rile some people up because I know when it comes to knives, there's a lot of opinions out there and we can all get pretty excited. But let's just keep in mind, this is only an opinion. But I really do not know if rotating your everyday carry knives is the best idea for everybody out there. Most knife enthusiasts like to carry many different knives on them, sometimes a different one every day. Sometimes it's for the sake of matching EDC gear to other EDC gear so you can color coordinate or coordinate certain brands. There's different reasons people mix and match their gear. I get that. I'm not saying there's an issue with that. At least not throughout your day-to-day life as far as normal tasks and things go. You probably will be okay. My issue is I'm always thinking about worst-case scenarios and emergency situations, and not crazy ones even, but something as simple as you run up at somebody who has a first aid scenario or a car accident and you have to cut a seatbelt. This might not seem like a big deal. Like, I've done 12 years in the volunteer fire department, I've done 8 years of wildfire. I've got a pretty good stress response, but I've seen many people who don't, and I've been in situations where my stress response has not been that good. When that happens, your fine motor skills go to absolute garbage. Anything that you think you can do, very small, meticulous, fine motor movements with your hands, as far as that stuff goes, it's gone. It's pretty much going to be shaking, and not even necessarily shaking, but the inability for you to control yourself in small ways the way you think you should. If you do not think I know what I'm talking about, which I might not, I encourage you to go listen to Tony Blauer interview Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith is a 205-pound light heavyweight UFC fighter, a top contender who has fought for belts and fought against some pretty damn impressive specimens of human beings who train a lot. And I'm not a professional fighter, but I've got my blue belt in jiu-jitsu and a decent amount of years of Muay Thai dicking around, and I can tell you, when you go into the ring against somebody, even just training, doing light sparring, who's got a lot more experience, it's just, you're outclassed instantly. It's not even, to say in a bar, well, I could knock that guy out, you have no idea what you're talking about. If you've got a lot of street fighting experience, you might have a little bit of an edge as far as stress response goes, but training the way that these guys do goes a long way. So listen to that podcast and you will understand how a fighter like Anthony Smith, who's a very large man, who's very capable of administering violence and pain to people, but he had someone break into his house, some scrawny kid who was cracked out on something, crack or whatever. He was drugged up and freaking out and hollering. Anthony Smith talks about how his motor skills went to garbage and how he couldn't knock this guy out. He couldn't do moves that he'd been doing for 10, 15 years because his body was not responding the way he wanted him to. Why am I talking about all that? The point is, if you are in a car accident, if you get attacked by a wild animal, if, God forbid, you get attacked by somebody on the street doing something they shouldn't be doing, you want to be reaching for something that you have built hours and days and years of confidence deploying, reaching for, basically something that you could do without thinking. Subconsciously, when I go to just fiddle with something, my hand goes to my knife pocket. It's always in the same spot. If it's not the same spot, my hand so quickly figures that out and then readjusts it and puts it back where it needs to be. Now, as I've put some of these different knives in my pockets for the sake of this channel the last couple of months, I've learned that it throws off my memory and my motor skills and my natural tendencies to want to jump and fiddle with a knife when I reach and notice there's a different one in there. Recon 1 is what I carried for 8 years, and the reason I'm saying all this is because I got so comfortable with this knife. And I know everyone's not going to carry the same knife in their pocket every day for 8 years. This knife here is an extension of my hand, and I don't feel like there's really a situation where, even if I'm shook up because of an emergency situation, if I get attacked or whatever, it might go to shit, but I've got so much pocket time and so many hours of use with this knife. It is an extension of my hand and my body to the point where I feel like I'm not going to miss the deployment on this knife in an emergency. If I do, I've fumbled this knife and missed the deployment so many times that it's not going to be an issue for me to pull it out and go, wah. It's just become a reflex for me to practice opening this knife, and if I fail on it, it's just, there's no, oh no, I missed it. It's, open this sucker up. And notice I've also got the thumb screw, the thumb stud switched on the other side. I've lost the other pocket clip, so I've got this set up for right hand draw right now. So it's actually even easier to deploy than that. I'm just to show you, even with the opposite thumb screw on, it's still quite deployable. But point is, it's because I'm so comfortable with this thing. Going from that to the Manix 2, not a big deal. Very similar size knife, the proportions and the profile, while the Manix 2 is a little smaller, it's a kind of the same shape compared to some other knives on the table here. So the Spider Flick, one habit that I noticed that I've gotten into when I first got this knife, I actually, well, the ball bearing lock's quite stiff. I have pretty tough-ish hands, and my fingers were wore down from just trying to break this stuff in for a couple days, and I actually ended up spider flicking a lot. I also thumb deployed and ripped my thumbnail off the first day I had this. Not off, but, you know, off enough that I was not going to thumb flick for a couple weeks. So the habit of spider flicking. I only spider flick when I'm holding it like this. That's the habit. I try to not get in the habit, and if I notice it, I break the habit of drawing from my pocket and spider flicking. Why? If I draw from my pocket and spider flick, what if I'm in a stress situation and I need to haul this knife out? And I know this is dumb, and I know this is about as likely as getting hit by lightning while on a unicycle in a ditch, but nonetheless, I think it's worth talking about, because if I did get, well, I'm going to use the coyote attack situation, but I'm walking home from work down a dark alley, and I get attacked by a street coyote. Well, I go to haul this thing out, and then in a panic, I go to spider flick it, and it flies out of my hand. Sorry, knife. I know people freak out because I throw my knives around all the time, but whatever. Hard on gear. I like to sharpen my shit. If I chip a blade, I'll learn, and you'll get to learn with me. But back to that. So, pulled this out, stressed out situation. I go to spider flick. I throw my knife. Not good. I want the reflex to be thumb open, and when I pull that out of my pocket, that's so natural, that's so consistent, and so easy to hit. If I hold it in my hand like this, I spider flick it all day. If I pull it out of my pocket, I thumb flick. That's my pattern. You're gonna see it in this video all the time, or in these videos. I will sometimes sit here and thumb flick it when I'm talking Spydercos, but you're gonna see this, the Spidey flick, almost all the time, because tabletop, that's the habit. Pulling out of my pocket, that's the habit. There is function, there is purpose to it. If you think this is ridiculous and there's no point to it, all I'm gonna ask is this. If you have anyone you care about and you're walking down the street, or let's say you're going to the city for some kind of an event or something like that, a concert, and something happens. I'm talking worst case scenario. You can watch videos. There's really great Instagram channels where you can check out this stuff happening and kind of see how people react. You don't turn into a superhero. And in Canada, we're not defending ourselves with knives here. This is not the talk we're having. But if you're in the States where it's legal to carry knives for self-defense, or if you're getting attacked by a street coyote, just think about it. If you're in a situation where someone you care about is in a life or death struggle, and all of a sudden now you reach out of your pocket, and you're thinking about that person you care about, right? Let's say your kid gets grabbed by a coyote. I'm talking, this is so slim chance of it happening. But would you want to panic, or would you want to not have to think about it and automatically draw the way you've done it 10,000 times with the same knife in the same position? So, again, the spider flick's not the best tactical deployment, obviously. But this is the meat of the conversation. This is what I'm talking about. And the same thing applies for if you just have, say, 3 or 4 knives that you rotate through your EDC. So the biggest thing would be, obviously, for me, not changing the size or the deployment method too much. If you're going to do that, if you must alternate your EDCs, and by the way, if you're going to do this regardless, I'm not saying you're a dumbass or a bad person or not a responsible knife owner or whatever. If you're going to swap your EDCs out, just keep in mind that if you're using something you're not used to using and you have to pull it out in a hurry, you're probably going to fumble it. So if you're swapping EDCs out, a lot of folks tend to like the same type of knife. So a lot of people will swap out certain Spydercos for other Spydercos, certain hinderers for certain hinderers, certain cold steels for other cold steels. An 80-10 and a 4MAX Scout and an American Lawman and a Cold Steel Recon 1 are pretty much all going to operate about the same. So swapping from one of those to one of those, not a big deal. Swapping from flipper tab to flipper tab, not a big deal. Unless you're talking a totally different profile, like, say, the Luzon to the M16 10 KSF. In that alone, aside from the fact the flippers are a little bit different, they're both flippers, but they're very different size, very different function, and they fit very differently in the hand. even going from that, from one size to another, I wouldn't, I mean, obviously, if you like bigger knives or smaller knives, you're probably going to stick to that preference. But going from a big EDC to a small EDC, that's going to throw your game off in that stressed out scenario. Changing lock types, not as big of a deal, because if you're deploying the knife roughly the same way, it shouldn't be as big of an issue. But I still, for the sake of work purposes, not just the most extreme kind of survival scenario we're talking about again, or self-defense, but if you're working and you have to use a knife, yeah, this axis lock sucks, by the way. This is a quality control issue, I believe, on Benchmade's part, and there's a little bit of not lack of perfection, we'll say, in the axis lock deployment on this knife. But regardless, see, different knives, different deployment, different patterns, more likely to drop them if you're on a roof and you have to cut something and while you're holding onto a ladder or whatever. Not the safest way to work, although obviously, but you get the idea. So would I trade out big knives versus small knives on a regular basis? No. So I'm probably going to take some of the smaller knives out of there. The 940 fits in between, but for me, for the bigger knives I carry, I put this in my pocket for 2 weeks after I bought it. In my main slot, actually, to replace the Manix 2, I put that in my right pocket. It's just a totally different knife, and going back and forth, I almost have to get used to the hand positioning again. So it really, that's why this whole video is created, because I'm understanding that if I had to, in a hurry, draw one of these knives, I'm going to fumble it because I'm breaking my patterns and the habits that my mind and my hands get used to. You can practice and train and be aware of the fact that, okay, I'm swapping out my Manix for my Benchmade today, but again, we're talking about those panic scenarios. If you've never been in one of those and you've never had one of those moments where you realize, I forgot what I just did for the last 5 minutes because I had so much adrenaline pumping through me, I might as well have been blackout drunk. How are you going to be able to make fine motor movements or remember certain things like, oh yeah, I switched my pocket knife out when that happens? You're probably not. So for folding knives, that really is the gist of it, I would say. Keep your same knives in your rotation, and I would say if you're going to rotate your knives, maybe wear one for a month. How can you really know if you like a knife if you're rotating every single day? If you're sampling, if you're trying to figure out how your body responds to certain foods or certain sleep optimizations, you've got to do something for several weeks or months consistently without switching up too many other variables, and if you really want to know about that one variable you've put in. So if I really want to know what the Manix 2 is like, I can't only put it in my pocket for a day here and a day there and let you know how it is. And the biggest issue right now as I'm getting these other knives some pocket time is I don't like taking this out of my main slot. So when I'm reviewing my other knives, I'm putting them in my right hand pocket or in a backup pocket, and I'm using them in different situations in comparison to this. I'll throw it in my main pocket just for the sake of trying it for a few minutes, but I don't like it. I don't like not having that same exact feel every time I go to reach for this out of reflex. Fixed blades, same thing. If you carry fixed blades on a regular basis, this won't be an issue for you. But if you're carrying a fixed blade for self-defense and you don't carry it on a regular basis, you're not even going to think to use it. Just as likely somebody else sees that thing dangling off your hip and tries to grab it off you if you end up in a grappling situation. So fixed blades, I would advise you use it in the same place. Appendix carry is typically the one I go with, and I try to carry this appendix carry as much as possible. I've also got a smaller sheath if I don't want to use this. This is a little bit big and bulky, and it does stick out of my shirt a little bit if I'm in jeans and a t-shirt. So if I don't want to draw any attention to myself, which, hey, it's an EDC tool fixed blade. If people ask me, I just say, no, this is a tool. I work in the woods, and I use knives. I'm a knife enthusiast. This is the same as a pocket knife. It's just a fixed blade on my waist. But appendix carry is nice. Not a fan of scout carry. Not a fan of having things dangling off my hip. But this is always in the same place unless I use this smaller sheath. And here, same issue. If I use this smaller sheath, I kind of even just like sticking it in my belt appendix style, kind of like old samurai style, tucked into my belt line. Or I'll lash it through a belt loop and stick it in my front left pocket or my rear pocket. But still, I don't like the idea of it not being in the same place, because if I panic, I like that being there. And really, in a self-defense scenario, a fixed blade should be your first choice because of the lack of having to fidget with an opening device or mechanism or anything like that. Less fumbling, less fidgeting, and again, less motor skills. So if you're really trying to take this to the extreme, this is what a lot of folks do if they're serious about self-defense, and this is, well, the reason a lot of operators and military and police officers go to fixed blades. Some will carry, and most will carry, a folding knife on them, but as far as defensive tactics go, fixed blades are going to win, like almost every time. As far as who's going to get their knife out first and into action, fixed blades, fixed blades, fixed blades. And even if you're just talking for a work situation, if you want to cut a package while you're up holding a ladder or holding something over your head, depending on the sheath, you should be able to open that or deploy it and then get it back in the sheath and back in your pocket. But again, it kind of varies from knife to knife. If it's the same every time, you don't have to think about it after the first week or two, but it's like that with everything. If you're trying to learn guitar, if you're trying to Filipino martial arts, these are the things coming to my mind right away. If you're trying to work a new knife or a stick pattern in, it's never going to happen the first day, or even you can do it for 5 hours. But doing something one day and then coming back the next day, it's smoother. Coming back the next day, it's smoother. The next day, it's smoother than that. So reps over time, beat the stuff into your brain, and worst case scenario, something happens that you get attacked or you fall off a cliff or you have an earthquake or something, a flood, and you need your knife to work when you're so stressed out that you're not actually thinking. It's kind of cool to know that my reflex is just going to be to grab this thing. So that's my thoughts on all this. How ridiculous is any of that? Depends on where you live and what your experiences are and what your day-to-day job is. It sounds really ridiculous to some, and it sounds like I'm probably not going into it enough to many others. And I'm also underqualified compared to a lot of the folks talking about this. So if there's people who feel like there's maybe something I'm missing, or maybe I'm overdoing something in a certain area, let me know. I'm curious. I'm just learning. This is purely for my own entertainment and just for the sake of bringing up something that I feel could be potentially worth knowing for somebody if they've never thought about it before. So let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know if you think I'm totally batshit crazy, or if you have any other ideas for videos like this that we could talk about some different hypotheticals, because I love talking about hypotheticals, especially when it has to do with knives and self-defense and survival and all that stuff. For now, I guess, check out all the reviews and different stuff on the channel for these various knives if you have any interest in knowing more about them. This is the Hard On Gear channel, signing off.